So before launching into the material, I just want to touch upon a couple of points: who I am, who versus who I'm not, as it pertains to this subject. So, full disclosure, I'm not a climate change communication expert. I've done a little bit of talking on the subject. I'm simply someone who has a bit of experience in the public arena and talking to decision makers and being in the hot seat at times with certain projects at times. So it's always interesting. And through it all, I've always walked away thinking how very, very challenging all communication is. It's not easy. And that brings me just to clarifying and touching upon, I think Juliana touched upon it a little bit, what this session is versus what it's not. It's not a how-to session, but more so an overview exploration of climate change communication outreach considerations, and some of which applies to a lot of other areas as well. And lastly, concerning today's audience, I've got a little bit of a background from Juliana prior to logging in here. And as I look at the makeup of what I understand to be the audience, there undoubtedly is a range of capability out there, familiar with the topic. I'm sure some of you out there are some seasoned pros and well versed in the subject. And perhaps on the other end of the spectrum, there's some of you with maybe a little bit less experience. And wherever you are, whatever your background is, it's my sincere hope that today's session triggers perhaps one or two ideas and maybe reminders for those of you who've done this before as you embark upon your climate change communication outreach journey. And with that, I just want to say I do believe communication is an art, and it's rather than a science. And so I'll start off this session, this presentation, with a playwright, giving that world it's an art. George Bernard Shaw said the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Communication is easier said than done. Effective communication requires more than the exchange of information. When done right, communication fosters understanding, strengthens relationships, builds trust, and quite frankly, it's a lot of hard work. If it was easy, I always think about if it was really easy when you look at what's happening in the States and looks at what's happening in the elections. You know, these folks, presidential candidates, prime ministerial candidates, they have teams of people who are communication experts. So surely they'd never make a faux pas, would they? And you can see that there's all sorts of challenges in that arena, and we see it all the time. So communication is simply, it's not easy. It's not black and white. It's not a science. And when you come to climate change, communication challenge, it's a complex issue. There's a lack of understanding, surprisingly. And I mean, one of the things that's what this program is trying to, help to bridge that gap a little bit. Psychological and ideological barriers exist. Your climate risk can appear distant and exaggerated. I'm sure in session one with Dr. Jeremy Fike and Dr. Dave Sauchin, some interesting data and information was shared in that one. The scale of the issue can be used to rationalize inaction. It's just too big. What can we do about it? It's Mother Nature, that type of thing sometimes I've heard. The need to plan for and incorporate uncertainty. And I think I imagine Owen James talked a little bit about that. And that's hard to deal with. We don't like uncertainty, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And it's associated with, unfortunately, political, social, and financial costs. And so there's a lot of things that come into the mix here. And I have my little friend here on the right-hand side, if you can see it, and it's Rubik's Cubes. I don't know if you've ever been able to solve a Rubik's Cube. I haven't, and I look at that as communication. So there are many pieces to this puzzle. We're only going to look at a few. I'm going to touch upon in the overview a little bit. Initially, topic one is about communication basics. And quite honestly, these basics apply to any endeavor I would submit to you. It's not just like climate change, the types of things that, when you're preparing for a presentation, you might think of to get prepared for what you're going to be up against. The second part, topic 2, is going to be on climate change communication tips, tools, resources, and some of the wisdom passed on from other people focusing on this area. And then the last one is really about change. It's not going to be a change management topic as much as how do you, being aware, I guess, and reconciling that against the backdrop of all what we're trying to do in this arena of talking about climate change, as change comes into it, and change is not that easy for all of us to contend with. So first of all, topic 1, communication basics. And what I want to talk about is really, again, in the context is what you might want to ponder. And I would submit to you, these are the same types of things you have to do with any type of presentation. But it definitely applies to something like communication outreach objectives. So I want to touch on target audience, what, before going into the presentation, some communication goals that I think each of us have to ground ourselves in for ourselves when we're about to do a presentation, and a few keys to good outcomes that, at least that I think are keys to good outcomes. So first of all, the target audience. I think in any case, any presentation that you do, you want to look at who is that audience, and ideally you want to tailor it to suit that audience. If you're talking to is, a group of elementary kids, or actually are you doing something for master's students? Doing your homework is important, and the purpose of the homework as much as anything. And it's not that you can do all the preparation you want, but you want to actually kind of put yourself in a position that you can kind of predict or get a sense of what you're up against, so you can tailor some of that information and prepare for it as best you can. And I would submit to you can't prepare for all situations either. And first of all, when I look at the group here, and I think there's a lot of people from the government here, and there's some other agencies as well, but typically I think the easiest group to talk to about something like this are your internal stakeholders. You might have external stakeholders. Your internal stakeholders, that'd be the people that we work with day in and day out. Maybe they are colleagues within a department, or maybe other departments. But generally speaking, we're probably more aligned to, the conversation that we might have on a climate change front is probably easier to have, more direct. You might not have to be as cautious about the words you use and the tripwires that come with some of the words you use in that, because day in, day out, you're probably aligned with the similar policies, initiatives in the company. Now, when it gets to looking at an external audience, it's important to take that inventory. When you go out in the public sector, that's a whole different game, that's for sure. Who is in that audience? In the private sector, they have different drivers. General public, it's a mosaic, a morass of different and divergent viewpoints that can exist. And so, and with that all, different people will have different levels of understanding of this. They may be novice, intermediate, and advanced. And again, age range comes into play too. What is the audience makeup? Could they be, for example, typically the younger set are very conversant with some of these issues. I would submit to you a lot of people in my demographic, my age bracket, and the people I talk to in different casual settings are not as versed as the younger set. And then occupational and economic status come into play too. I mean, your occupational, for those of you in this crowd, I would think, looking at it, are generally in a more of a professional arena, a white collar type of job. The water cooler chat that takes place, probably it's not, I would think climate change is at the forefront day in, day out. Some friends of mine who are in the blue collar sector working on housing construction and whatnot, I can say, no, it's not top of mind. And it's interesting when you look at that. And of course, again, the educational background, you want to know where people are coming from. And of course, a big tripwire is, as we see in various issues, including with the pandemic, is political orientation comes into play. And probably one of the biggest things is, who do they trust and respect? And that's a big thing. And it really plays a role in faith organizations, for example. And there's going to be more about that we'll share with you in a moment here on that. And then there's some information by Columbia University down in the States, Center for Research and Environmental Decisions. And they said, we need to put ourselves in other people's shoes to better understand how might they react to our climate change communication messages. And they suggest that people respond and react to messages about climate change is shaped by differing values. For example, what do they think about freedom, prosperity, or equality? Their identities, how they see themselves, how we see themselves, ourselves, being a caregiver, a progressive, or a business person, you know, gets shapes that. Worldviews, think the world should be egalitarian or hierarchical. And how about personal priorities, health and finance? So let's take that last one, for example. I would submit to you a stockbroker working in New York, is probably working on Wall Street 16 hours a day. I would submit to you, and I'm generalizing, their number one priority might be finance, because working 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, I don't know if your health is being regarded in that case. So it's that type of thing. You want to look at who's in that crowd and where they're coming from. And then what's the possible predisposition towards the topic? There are different types of audiences. And some have characterized three groups, saying there's advocates, indifferent, and deniers. And the reality is you have an indifferent audience, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as well here coming up in another slide. The indifferent audience, that's probably the most fertile ground for communication, because they could be indifferent. They're quite honestly, they're not spending a lot of time looking at the subject. So education outreach objectives have there's an opportunity to have some success in that ground, in that arena there. Now, how about the denier audience? On the extreme end, I would submit to you, people made up their mind. It reminds me of the old television series back in my day, and I'm for those who are younger you won't remember it, some of the older will. Archie Bunker and Anita's Archie Bunker said, "Shut up, I made up my mind, so don't confuse me with facts." So there's that group out there. But I have to hope within that denier audience, there's somebody maybe being influenced by that extreme, but also has an opportunity upon further dialogue upon better information, actually learn that there's something going on here and that they can be a part of the solutions moving forward. And then there's the advocate audience. Those are the champions. They've got it already. They understand this. There's nothing really needed here in the case of the advocate audience, other than to help build around that momentum. And so what you do and what you're going to talk about depends on what the audience you have. So I've talked about a little bit about the target audience, and in terms of, but what's the scoop on Alberta view? So it's for this segment here, at least what we're talking about in this program, is what's happening in Alberta. And a wonderful initiative, in which we're going to refer to a little bit more in other slides and even the second topic of this module here, is the Alberta Narratives Project, and was conducted a number of years ago. And they went around and got Albertans together from different sectors, different groups, different political viewpoints. And they came up with it's an excellent publication that will be referenced in your reference material here, and some interesting learnings from that. And if you take a look, some of the key findings from that project were as follows. It said most, though not all, people accepted that weather is changing. Interesting. Albertans were split about whether climate change is caused by humans or natural variations. People find it hard to talk about climate change and rarely do so. I would think, though, this past summer with all the heat, I would think that I would hope that have come up with in every household. People would prefer to talk about preparation and adaptation rather than causes and mitigation. And that's a key point that's going to come up into how you temper one's communication. And that comes up into advice from other entities out there as well. So anyway, that's interesting to see what's happening in that front. Now, so, doing a little bit of a scan helps you understand, well, geez, okay, if I'm going to go into the advocate audience, denier audience, indifferent audience, what I might at least be prepared to, what might come up, or what kind of views they might. And if you look at the narratives project, you're going to the public, those findings show you could have a little bit of everything out there. Now I want to just touch upon communication goals. And, once you, and this is applicable to, as you ponder your presentation outreach initiative, whether you can do public presentation, maybe a workshop or whatever you're going to do, communication goals, after looking at the audience, you say, what are the goals for this session? And there's different goals for different audiences, indeed. If you look, in some cases, it might be to inform or educate, to persuade or convince, to activate, inspire, or motivate. And I would submit to you, if you take a look at the indifferent audience, you have an art who are kind of maybe not too busy, you haven't really given them much attention. Inform and education, there's some fertile ground to work on that. And maybe persuade and convince them that, get on board. You're trying to get them on board to helping out with what we're all trying to do here. The advocates, they're already on board. So you may want just to activate them, help them to be part of those champions and do more championing. They're convinced, but how we can get them involved. And they also to inspire and motivate. I would submit to you too, the denier, and again, I would hope, at least with a lot of dialogue, there might be some fertile ground there to inform and educate. And obviously, there's diminishing returns. You can only you can pull the. I always say you can only push the rope or pull the rope, and you have to decide what's going to be the most effective energy expenditure on your part. And then it's fine to, those typical things. Anybody's been doing speaking, saying, well, what I'm trying to do here is motivate, inspire, facilitate. I like to use questions like this for myself. So some of it's kind of just grounds me. Maybe there's some baby steps, because in an ideal world, I would like to say it's almost like climbing a staircase. We may want to go from the bottom level, and if you've ever gone in a big mall and tried to talk, if you had to go right to the top without a platform, it gets a little tiring. So there's usually a little platform maybe before, and then there's a rise of stairs, another platform. And I would think sometimes I'm looking at myself as maybe there's some baby steps involved. So I ask myself, is it to facilitate understanding? And this is for any type of presentation. Is it to help find common ground on this issue? In this case, is it to help folks become just a little bit more climate literate? Like, helping them understand some of the terminology just might be enough to be the beginning starting point. Or is it convince them that climate change is real? And maybe, and what I found with contentious audiences or resistance for various things, maybe it's just to create a pathway for further dialogue, that we've had a conversation that allows us, and we may agree to disagree, but allows us to have a chat on another day and continue with that dialogue. And certainly seen some success in certain endeavors by just having that dialogue. And that's the thing about communication. I'd say it's really difficult. So this idea that we can even do a session like this and everybody can get it, or vice versa, that's not going to happen in my opinion. It's just it needs all we're going to be doing is spraying the grass here, and I think it requires extra exploration on when you're talking to somebody, when you're doing a presentation, to help them, especially if they want to get it. Now, here's another set of criteria or brackets of people, and this comes from the George Mason University Center for Climate Change and Communication. And so, there's different categories. You saw the advocate, the indifferent, the denier. They've given a little bit more dimension here. They say the alarmed, the concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive. And what they have here on the left-hand side, the highest belief in global warming, they're the most concerned and most motivated. On the right-hand side is the lowest belief in global warming and least concerned and least motivated. And the recommendations on how, given that you know who your target audience is, your goals might be a little bit different. And here's what they recommend. If you're on the alarmed and concerned side, on the left side, activate them, get them involved, show them how they can get involved in the initiatives. It's interesting on the next three, cautious, disengaged, and doubtful, they say, engage them. There's fertile ground, educate. There's a lot of opportunity there to get them to understand what's happening. And I found the last one a little bit humorous, but I can identify with that. Is just don't annoy them on the dismissive side. So I think the recommendations are spot on here in this. Now, depending who we speak to, some will just require more effort. Some will take a lot of time. I would submit to you, again, it's not just a one-off, and particularly if you're trying to convince somebody further on the right-hand side of that spectrum, it's got to be a number of interchange, intersections of dialogue taking place, and we have to have some time for that. So if our end goal of all of this is climate change action support, we got to recognize it's going to be different for different entities and different groups and different people, depending on their background, where they come from, their belief systems, everything. So there's going to be curves ahead. There's careful navigation. It's not going to be easy. It isn't easy. It's never easy, quite frankly. So but we do have to keep that end goal in mind. Lastly, I just want to talk about in terms of what to, when you're thinking about before delivering or your climate change outreach communications, whatever that format includes, is some keys to outcome. And there's several that I just want to touch upon that, at least for me, are meaningful, and hopefully they are for you too. I want to talk about a little bit the understanding about the communication aspects and their impact, understanding some of the key barriers that exist. And also touch upon a very important concept that you see in climate change communication circles, the importance of finding common ground. And then what I believe is important when you're dealing with hostile audiences and is being a scout rather than a warrior. And I use that term, scout can be an explorer rather than a combatant. And it's easier said than done, but I'll touch upon that. And then using the right size outreach format, venue, and personnel for the occasion. So let's go into that. So one of the things is recognizing, so one of these in terms of keeping in mind, in terms of keys outcome, is that not everybody processes information the same way. I mean, we have learning preferences, and educators are different models of this. And just to show you one of these, the learning modalities. Some people prefer, for example, their auditory, oral. Some are visual learners. Some are kinesthetic. If I think about back to my university days, I was always the envy of the person who could just listen to the lecture and they got it. They just got it. And I mean, they just processed it, and they're really, and they didn't have to do anything more. And again, I'm going to, when I'm alluding to these are generalizations, because the realities, all of us can have a little bit of everything involved here. But the auditory, I always think of that person who could just get it by listening, and that's where they live, and that's how they learn. The visual, much like myself, I can hear it, but I got to write it down. I got to cement it. I have to see it. I have to draw it. I have to do all that thing. So typically for myself, I tend to be a little bit of a visual learner. And then there's a kinesthetic, the mechanic, has to go and fix things. The operators that I know in water and wastewater treatment, they learn by doing, and boy, can they explain it. They might not be able to pass that written test, but boy, it doesn't mean they don't know it. So these are, and why this is important, again, when we're looking at how people learn, we're looking at, we use terminology, we have a bias of how we present things too. So when someone says they don't get what you're saying, we may need to repackage it so they get what we're trying to convey. And that's what makes communication difficult, because you don't know where people reside. I know very much in Indigenous circles, a community circle approach, it's all about lots of dialogue, lots of dialogue. If I show a graph early on in my career, I said, that's not the way to go. We'll get to the graphs eventually, but the first thing is the bigger picture. Is, what's this project going to do for the community? How's it fit into our values? How's it going to, for the long term? So there's a real interesting dynamic and in that takes place in Indigenous settings, which is almost broader reaching than, for example, myself preparing, I'm going to do a water treatment report and presenting this, and well, I'm focused on that, but there's a bigger context of conversation. So sometimes it's about like, let me tell you what's taking place, how it works. And they're asking, explain to me, what's the story around this, the bigger picture, and how it's going to impact our community, broader issues. That graph is not the first thing I'm going to show. And then I love this. This is the Sheldon Big Bang Theory type, and for those of you who are engineers or out there or in the scientific community, I mean, really, when you look at equations, it's a form of shorthand to communicate what's happening into the world. And some of us understand that, but I would submit to you, there's lots that don't. And so maybe some of the messages, let me write down for you, show you how it works, and see this all the time in our consulting and engineering circles and with our scientists as well. And it's the Sheldon, comes out and say, come on, it's clear, just read this. It's all here. Can't you get it? And no, I don't get it, right? And then there's the people that are, again, kinesthetic. Let me show you how it works. Move that switch over there. I know in dealing with over 30 years in operator training, very, very, they're champions of the water and wastewater industry in high regard for it. We'll give them a stack of O&M manuals and they'll look at it eventually, but first, it'll mean something first after, or I should say after they've had a chance to wrestle with the material, the equipment, and they learn by doing, moving those mechanisms. And so the whole point of this learning modality in a given audience, we're showing graphs, we can show, it doesn't necessarily mean something to certain different people. And so we got to bear that in mind. Now, the other aspect of communication aspects and their impact is taking a look at verbal versus non-verbal impacts. And this is well touted in circles like Toastmasters and whatnot. They say when you're giving a presentation, any type of presentation, the impact comes to the words, what we say, the voice and tone, how we say it, and lastly, body language, expressions, and gestures. And this is where we're going to have a little bit of a Menti poll, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah for the Menti poll question.
About 2/3 now, people think the consensus is voice and tone, how we say things.
Well, that's impressive. Most audiences that I'll do this with is you've got to bang on. So I can tell this is a seasoned audience here. Yeah, I mean, the studies from University of California research back in the 1970s indicate the 7% of the impact comes from what we say, 38% from how we say it, and 55% from expressions and gestures or body language. And when I look at something like this, is it 7%? Doesn't matter. Is it 38%, 55%? The biggest message for me in this type of thing is that how we say it and convey it matters more than sometimes the words. And it's not that words are not important, because they are very much important. But when you're doing a presentation, you can get sized up pretty quickly, and this is what happens. And so and specifically in relation to the study that came up with this, they say studies suggested that we overwhelmingly deduce our feelings, attitudes, beliefs about what someone says, not by the actual words spoken, but by the speaker's voice, language, and tone of voice. And if words and body language disagree, one tends to believe the body language. And really, the message here is about congruence and how we communicate. Because if I say to you, just, I really want to listen to you, tell me to share your ideas, I think all of our crap detectors go off and say, no, well, that's probably not happening there. So it makes sense that the congruence, and that's what makes, by the way, I'll talk about different modes of, preferences of outreach initiatives. That's what makes this difficult, quite honestly. I can't see you. I can't tell if any of the messages are resonating, if eyebrows are coming up from the audience itself. So we communicate in different ways, just in the words, and the words do matter, but it's interesting, not as much as what we think. So words certainly do matter, but they're only part of what's required. And how we say it and convey it certainly matters, as well as where's the speaker made their predisposition towards a topic. Let's say something climate change. Where are they coming from? Maybe they've already formulated some views, and we always want to try to get a handle on that if we can. Now, the other thing is understanding some of the barriers. Someone would be preparing for this. What are some successful keys to some outcomes? Is understanding some barriers that might exist. And from the Intergovernmental Panel from Climate Change, they have the Communications Handbook, and you can take a look at that. That's available on the web. And in some of the communication research insights indicate facts alone are not sufficient for public engagement. So you can have all the facts, and I think we've seen that. It's interesting on the pandemic as well. And they indicate that people filter the information according to whether it fits their values. And when I look at this, and it comes down to, when we're saying something, right now I'm delivering some information, I've encoded the message, I send it over to you, you've decoded it, and when we're having a dialogue, what this means to me is, for example, when we're talking, some of us, there's different studies out there indicating the speed at which we talk. Some of us speak, I think the average about 120 words a minute, maybe 140 words a minute. And when you think of just, when I always cognizant for myself, I'm talking to you and I might say just, how many, if I'm using 140 words in a minute, and then you take a word just like blue. So you take the word blue. If I say blue, what's resonating with you? Is it turquoise blue? Is it navy blue? Is it light blue? That's just one word. How can we possibly expect by just one sending transmission of the message to people to get what we're saying without a constant dialogue going back and forth, back and forth? So most of the time, people seek out information, the research indicates, that supports their existing beliefs and values. And it rejects information that contradicts the beliefs and the values that are most important to them. And I think we see that with this, some of what's happening during this pandemic as well. So climate change, this is clearly what's articulated in some of the research. In the IPCC, again, research shows values and political views dominate. Scientific facts, knowledge not as important. And what they say, for the science to be heard, it must connect with widely shared public values, points, and issues of local interest, not what's happening far away in the world. What's happening in our own backyard is the message I receive from that. And I would submit to you, when we're communicating, we're trying, and especially when we're trying to, on a topic like climate change and some other issues where there's strongly held views, we're trying to make a bridge. And one of the things the research says is don't look for blame. So if you can see on the far right-hand side, let's not use that one. So you start by building a bridge. You need the science, you need the education, you need the facts, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide. But now the key to getting to the other side is communication, and that's what we're talking about here in this segment. And the biggest part of that is active listening. And that active listening requires seeing where people are really coming from, actively taking interest in where they're coming from, what their concerns are. And that active listening shows respect to people. I think for all of us, we feel respected when somebody's listening to us. And respect in turn shows that we care. And caring at the end of the day is one of the key things to building trust. So to get to the other side, it's very critical that we have the ability, we do actively listen to show respect, be respectful, and truly care about people's concerns, where they're coming from, in order to build a trust so that we can build and have a discussion, and have that discussion might be not the first time we engage in this, about some common ground moving forward. And I love this from David Irvin, I do believe he's a sociologist, definite leadership consultant. And he talks about when we're trying to bridge barriers, it starts with seeing, hearing, and experiencing the others as they are, not as they should be, could be, or ought to be. People need to know that they're not judged. And this doesn't mean living without expectations, he says. What it does mean is relating in a way that feels safe, supportive, and caring. And a key relationship principle is to connect before you expect. Now, another key to successful outcome is recognizing there are going to be resistance. You're in the frying pan sometimes, and there's and many of us have had those interesting occasions, and they're not easy. Handling resistance conflicts, definitely not easy. And three sources of problem in the research, I can resonate or identify with this, is different perceptions. So one of the things is make sure we articulate and understand each other's perceptions. Negative emotions come into play. We'll talk about in the last topic about when you introduce changes, negative emotions and a whole suite of emotions is normal. Unclear communication. We'll talk about a little bit more about that in topic 2 here. But one of the things is important is to clarify getting the words right. What are we actually talking about? And that's important as well. And so what some of the recommendations or strategies for handling problems are is put yourself in other people's shoes, understand the emotion, theirs and yours. We have emotions too. When you're in the frying pan, it's not easy to deal with some of these emotions, that's for sure, when in contentious issues, when you're the speaker. Discuss each other's perceptions. And again, listen actively, listen where people are coming from. That's So often we size things up and maybe haven't bridged that gap. Show that you understand them, speak to be understood, come up with options for mutual gain, and be friendly as wherever possible. And here, a pet peeve of mine in handling resistance and conflict, and this is one I have to work on all the time. I say, be kind first, be right later. Be kind first, be right later. When we are in the moment, it's so easy to forget the goal is connect with the other side. That's the aim in any of these types of issues. We can get so caught up in winning that we forget about connecting. And labeling is easier than getting to know someone who disagrees with us. And so I got those cans there, and I said, yeah, we can size people up, and we have to do that to some degree. And when I said, so this maybe contradicts to something, I said, who's your target audience? Where are they coming from? What is their beliefs? But the reality when we're doing that, we're trying to prepare ourselves just to get a sense what we might be up against, but we really don't know until we talk to people. And I would say, if you take a look at these cans, I don't think you know what's inside if you take off the label. And I think the only way you get to know what's inside is you have to open up the cans. So it's important, I think, at times, and most times, to discard the label. I mean, check out what's inside, and that requires lots of dialogue. Lastly, key to the outcome, I think, is format. Well, it's not the last one's second last. Yeah, I guess it is. Format for climate change outreach depends on the communication, outreach, and purpose. Who's the audience? Their predisposition topic. What do you hope to accomplish? So if I look at the left-hand side, if you know the format, I would submit to you this is the worst format if I'm going to talk to somebody, especially on the right-hand side of the spectrum of the denier type. Quite honestly, I don't think it's the best forum for what we're doing right now, but it's the best of what we've got. Because having FaceTime, I would prefer the second. You know, pictogram there where we're talking, and at least I can see what's being communicated by people's reactions. I got a better sense of what's happening when I'm communicating to see, oh yeah, I can see that this one didn't resonate. There's some arms going up. I can see the scowl. And if you're really trying to get to the right-hand side, I think some workshops and community circle type of approaches, sitting around the table, and that what the Alberta Narratives Project seems to have done, is up there. And then on the far right-hand side, lots of dialogue, one-on-one. I would submit to you in a group like this, as a large group today, when my experience is when talking to large groups, the types of dialogue that takes place, well, right now it's just one way with this webinar, and we're gonna obviously have some questions and to and fro, but it's hard to, some people are very resistant or nervous and shy and don't want to even ask questions and to reveal what they think. I would submit to you on the far right, you can find out really what people think. And that requires a lot of outreach and a lot of time, you know. So FaceTime to enable discussion is really where everybody's best heard. I guess, yeah, lastly, there is this, the other aspect. You know, we all must recognize, again, trust is a big thing for people, and you can have all the right facts, figures. At the end of the day, we're just people, and we need some verification. And the people who are most likely to change our minds are the ones we identify with, agree with on majority of topics. If someone you know likes, truly believes that idea, you're likely to give it more merit and weight and consideration. I think that's with anything. If I, for example, buy a car, which I recently bought a vehicle, I do all the research, I have all the facts and the figures, but guess what? I still need a warm, fuzzy feeling. I want to talk to somebody who's driven that, yeah, who maybe knows something about cars, who I like, who's a mechanic type thing, and get their opinion. And then despite all the facts and figures, I still need that warm, fuzzy feeling. And I would submit to you, in different audiences, we can have all the facts and figures we want, but if we don't have somebody there that the audience respects and trusts, that can be difficult. So sometimes we may, quite honestly, need to bring somebody else along. And with that, to wrap up on this session, I just want to, I think the Alberta Narratives Project that we've referred to gives a good glimpse into what happens if you can bring people together in an appropriate setting, and it also gives you a pulse on what happens in what the take in Alberta is from the different audience types. So with that, we have showtime. So we're gonna have a little bit of a video for you. Okay, hopefully you found that interesting in terms of summing up some of what can happen in bringing people together in terms of, and I think the Alberta Narratives Project ideally is a model that that would be great if we could follow something like that and get the whole population involved. So certainly interesting, very impactful, and there's going to be references to that, by the way. So I'd like to recap what we covered in this first topic before moving on to the second one. And it was that communication is not easy at the best of times, and climate change communication is even more complex and challenging. It's very contentious to some. I think it's, I would like to believe we've made significant progress over the number of years, but we got a long ways to go. The purpose of communication must recognize the type of audience and place. Sometimes, to me, it's like sometimes it's just creating an opening to continue the discussion another day is enough. And that's important, especially when you're trying to reach somebody who's set against some of the things that we're talking about. And that dialogue, ongoing dialogue, is important. Scientific facts matter, but less than most think. So we must bear that in mind when we're doing our communication outreach. People process information through their value sets. And to connect, we must find common ground. And to find common ground, we must listen. And for me, that's about reminding myself to be a scout rather than the warrior, explorer rather than combatant. Care in order to help build trust, and that's key, care. Phrase I just love, and I try to ground myself every day. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And where people are coming from, understanding where they're coming from is the first foundational piece to building some of that trust that's needed to have dialogues on another day. Communication format matters, FaceTime matters to enable discussion, and two-way listening, lots of dialogues needed. Sometimes we may need a trusted ally to come along, one that's trusted within the group or community. For example, I see in this segment here, I mean, there's a large segment of agricultural folks here. I certainly wouldn't want to go speak about climate change issues on agriculture. I don't feel comfortable about that. So it's okay with your outreach initiatives too, to bring somebody along, and somebody who gets what people are going through and what they're trying to wrestle with. And I think it's important to do so when we're trying to do something like that. And with that, I turn it over to you again, Sarah.
Thanks, Gary. So we're going to do our second poll right now. So what we're looking to find out in this poll, the answers are similar to what we asked in our first session with Dave and Jeremy, but today we're wording our question a little bit differently in the sense that we'd like to know what climate trend comes up the most in conversation with your work colleagues. What do people talk about the most around the water cooler, around the virtual water cooler these days?
Okay, second topic and talk about communication tips, tools, and resources, specifically climate change communication tips and resources and that are out there, and touch upon some of the things in including some of the questions came up. Hopefully it'll cover some of this. Climate change communications, there's no one size fits all approach. Hopefully you got that from the previous segment. And again, that's no different than for climate change communications or other communications. We have to look at the audience, where they're coming from, and what the goals are for the presentation. And there's just not a one size fits all. If that was, it'd be an easy endeavor. And I love this metaphor. It says, when it comes to climate change communications, sometimes it feels like a slow moving glacier. Surely we've been talking about this for a long time, but I guess I'm an optimist. I think we've been going like this. I'm hoping we're going to get exponential on this in terms of people getting it. I would like to hope that. And so we'll see what happens in that regard. Luckily, there are a range of tips and tools and resources that can help out there. So we're gonna be a little bit of a tour guide through some of that stuff that exists out there. So what I want to talk about is some of the words of wisdom from some of the folks out there regarding the words and messaging, and show you some of the visual aids and resources that you can tap into, and also point to some resources that exist. So first of all, the words and messaging. Words and phrase, in the previous session said, well, facts and figures and words don't matter as much as other things like how body language, how you convey it, but they do matter. Let's face it, it does. It's just saying in that context was when you're talking to an audience at a given moment in time, um, they size you up pretty quick based on the congruency of how you're talking about various things and how you're coming across. So there's a congruency needed with your voice, your body language, and they're looking into your eyes and seeing if you're congruent with all of that. But words do matter. They do matter. And one of the key things is that you have to clarify the terms that might carry different meanings, and we're going to explore that here. And key is establishing common meaning. I think every week there is something that I come across, and I was thinking this when we're talking, and somebody's over here, and really when you started looking at it, we hadn't defined the terms that we're talking about. So again, on a weekly basis, that's a challenge I find. So it's so important to make sure we understand what we're talking about and what we're not talking about. And I love this. This is from the Columbia University, the Center for Research and Environmental Decisions, and they give examples here, and these are beautiful. I was excited about this stuff. Suggested word and language, and they said if somebody's using a word, so put yourself in a scientist, an engineer, you're a planner out there, and you're using these terms that the scientific word scheme, and this you can imagine the conversation going on in the audience back there. Hey Joe, it's a conspiracy. They got a scheme going on here, right? Or uncertainty. That word's a common thing. And Owen James, I'm sure, would have talking about that terminology, uncertainty. We use it all the time. We know what that uncertainty means, but to the certain a layperson means, hey Joe, that means they don't know. And without giving that dimension. And I love this, positive trend. Oh, that must be a good trend. Geez, they're confused. They're talking about they said it's a positive trend, and they said it's actually something good, Joe. And then again, adaptation. This is a beauty. You can see how this could be misconstrued. Going with the flow, dealing with problems as they arise. These folks really don't know those experts up there. And then another beautiful one, theory. It's a hunch. It's an opinion, conjecture, just speculation. They don't really know. So you can see how these could be tripwires right out of the get-go if one doesn't use or define the terms, or perhaps reword it and think about the terms that might resonate. And what they suggest, better language when you're talking about a scheme, is a blueprint, some sort of plan moving forward. And for uncertainty, maybe talk about a range, and give some context to it. Positive trend, it's an upward trend, doesn't mean it's good or bad. Depends what you're talking about. Adaptation, it's increasing preparedness for climate impacts. And then theory, physical understandings of how this works. So when you take a look at something like that, it really resonates with me. How often do we all use jargon that we're used to and we don't think of it? And I know get corrected on the home front with my lovely wife. She's always asked me, what do you mean by that? What word? And I find, oh yeah, I've been using some technical jargon that I haven't defined well. No wonder we're not communicating and the message is not landing. And then key is taking tech talk to people talk, in my view. And this is one thing I'm a big fan of, even we're in many of us who interface with the public at the end of the day is being cognizant of that. And I love this little comic here where it says, this is what typical, and I'm an engineer, so I'm going after my own kind, so don't tar and feather me. But I think this is funny. This is what the Sheldon type would say to somebody that is about to get hit. It says a 1,500 kilogram mass is approaching your head at 45.3 meters per second. Well, that's precise, but I think the most important thing is to say, look out. So this is beautiful. So we all get wrapped up sometimes in, again, this, to me, the left side means that's, this facts and figures type of thing rather than the significance and the impact of what it's going to do to somebody. So I love that. Well, taking tech talk to people talk to illustrate in other matters. In the news, you might see something like this, and I would submit to you that everybody in the news reading this, I don't care where they come from, they'd understand this table. It says severe weather caused all this damage, and they rank it from from the first one in 2016, Fort McMurray fire, down to number 10, multiple events. And everybody can understand that. But I don't know if you'd remember all those numbers coming out of that session. They're relaying it to a buddy afterwards. And Greg Stewart of the Insurance Bureau, I think, captured the essence of that table by saying we are having the storms we've had in the past. The difference is the intensity within shorter period of time. That's the real, that's part of the significance. And then if there's one thing you'd remember from this, and I think this is great, where I think he says, bigger storm, bigger bucks. And that's something, if somebody said you went to a presentation, what did you learn? Bigger storm, bigger bucks resonates with a lot of people. So taking that tech talk to people talk sometimes is a good way to get the message across. And one of the most, the Alberta Narratives Project, which you had a glimpse into, they have some recommendations that came out of that Alberta Narratives Project regarding the framing of messages. And what they have in there is the most successful language that speaks well across multiple audience, is engaging and stimulates a strong discussion on the left-hand side, to the least successful language that feeds division, does not engage people and does not stimulate discussion. So they found the most successful language on the left-hand side, everyone is important in Alberta, rather than saying having an excessive focus on oil and gas. Most successful language, main problems with oil and gas are over dependency, vulnerability, insecurity. And the one that does not land very well is the main problem with oil is climate change and environmental destruction. That doesn't, I guess, build those connections and build those bridges to reaching people. The most successful, we need to diversify, versus Alberta can be a leader in climate change. So again, on the right-hand side, that's not what drives some of the demographic. We can discuss our choices versus this is the only way, the take it or leave it type of scenario. And it just doesn't resonate. That's what they've suggested. And they said actually people appreciate the straight talk more than the euphemisms and the slogans, the techno jargon. And they appreciate that straight talk comes on and really stating this will not be easy, rather than saying, oh yeah, we're going to have all this will be easy with eco boosterism and things like that. Renewables offer a new opportunities and positive challenge, the next boom, versus clean energy will replace dirty fossil fuels. That alienates people. Building a transition towards something new versus transitioning away from something old. So there's some examples of some key message framing that is recommended as a result of the Alberta Narratives Project. And then again, I encourage you to, there'll be a link to that you should spend some time reading. And I mean, there's other messages that are found in the industry or throughout the sector, they said, that really resonate. Climate change is real, it's harmful, our actions are causing it. Experts agree, our actions can reduce the threat. So those are some of the more common ones that they found worldwide that typically resonate. With that in mind, then I want to move now. So there's resources in terms, we have to be cognizant of the types of words we're using, the messaging, how we phrase that messaging. And there's it's important to also incorporate some visuals where we can, when we can. And the great news about that, there's great resources that you can tap into and draw upon that'll point to you in this regard. Climateoutreach.org is an excellent source. They have infographics, videos, photos that you can use, and they have a great session and talk about the importance of photos, infographics, and videos. The key principles of climate visuals and that they articulate is that you're supposed to show real people, not stage photo ops. Tell new stories. Don't focus on old stories all the time. Show climate causes at scale, and they note that climate impacts are emotionally powerful, and I think we all know. So you have to be careful and be cognizant of it and what you're showing as well. So there's a lot of emotion get involved depending who you're talking to and what the scenario is and how it might have impacted a particular area. Show local but serious climate impacts. Be careful with protest imagery and understand your audience. So at the end of the day, it comes back to, there are visuals, but you definitely want to be sensitive to what types of visuals you use. Anyway, there's a great document that, and you can take a look at it, talking about what they recommend in this regard. And we all know that photos tell a story that words can't. If you take a look at the photo on the left and the photo on the right, well, the photo on the left, I can remember seeing a photo like that from Europe prior to the southern Alberta fires, and you say, wow, look at that's happening. And then a year later, it's in our, it used to be all this is happening away in the world. It's now in our front yard, happening right in our front door. And of course, we've seen all too frequent these wildfires, and Alberta has experienced undue share of that with Slave Lake and Fort McMurray, and some of those events have just been catastrophic. So, photos tell a story that words can't. And here's some slides that I use sometimes to illustrate when I'm using an opening about climate change and the impacts of extreme weather events. 2011 to 2016, people very quickly can get a sense of the magnitude and what's happening by just looking at photographs. And infographics, there's lots of great resources on that, and we'll have some sources or links to that. Owen James, I think on session number, I think that would have been the second session, I do believe, would have been talking about the risks and whatnot. And I love this one. This is, if you're trying to get people to understand, resilience, hazard mitigation, climate change adaptation, and hazards in a very quick infographic, rather than reading copious, line by line through a document. This is an excellent way to get some concepts across. And again, in the Slave Lake, you can read about the impact. An infographic like this gives the sense of the impact. 8,000 residents had to be evacuated, over 700 families left, over 300 homes destroyed, etc. So infographics certainly tell the story. And of course, film, what we didn't have years ago, and we have our abundance availability, and there's links to things that you can use. I'll show you in a bit. That film is the language that everybody learns to read from an early age, and it appeals. So the power of that is obviously that it appeals to a variety of sensory inputs and helps make the information understood to wide use and demographic and differing learning modalities as well. So there's a lot of resources, as I mentioned. The climate change video, climateoutreach.org is, you can download some of these videos. Another one, and I'm going to show you a clip after this slide, is from down in the States, and they have even videos on different sectors. They have, for example, on the left-hand side, the Alberta the agricultural chapter, the water chapter, and the health chapter. And they have some, it's done by a group called the Story Group, and very powerful. And we got permission to be able to show this. And I'd like to give an example how this one story can say more than kind of wraps up a lot of things that we're trying to say, but it's the power of film.
Another day of working inside, another day that we can't take care of the crops. When I'm in the middle of a rainstorm or in the middle of the conditions where it's hard for us to be able to do anything out in the field, it's too muddy, too wet, or something going on, and then you have that next event that you see coming, and you wonder how you're going to get all your work done, how you're going to take care of the crop the way it should be taken care of. We've been here in Iowa about 35 years now. I've been farming since I was 15, so this is my 46th crop that we're putting out, and it just seems that we're having more extreme events. The last several years, the volatility has just been extreme. We have those rain events that are 3, 4, 5 inches in an hour, or 6 or 8 or 10 inches in a 24-hour period, and those are just not normal. And it's those kind of events that it's very hard to plan for and to really try to mitigate. Whew, man, it's windy. With this excess moisture, we're going to have some disease problem in our corn and our soybeans because of the excess wet, because of the excess humidity. See, very short. It's brown looking, doesn't have too many roots, and it's just suffering from too much moisture. Well, you know, and before the last 3 or 4 years, climate change, I guess my vision of the world of climate change was about a few people trying to make money on the deal, you know, to try to scare enough people into investing in, you know, technology and new things that would use less fuel, that would mitigate some of the effects that they claimed was going to happen, and particularly the heat. But as a farmer, in the last several years, we are actually seeing those changes happen here on the farm. You know, we're having more and more extreme events, you know, whether it's heat or cold or too much rain or not enough rain. In the last 10 years, our costs to grow a crop have gone up almost 5 times. You know, we've added equipment so we can plant and harvest in a much shorter time window. We've been more mindful of the soil cover that we have because of the serious rain events. We're also building up our infrastructure in our soil. These tile will take away that extra water that we have in our soil to allow our roots to grow deeper in the soil and just produce a better crop. It's a lot of water coming out of there. That's what they're in for. That's that $1,000 an acre investment. Those blessings that we have to be out in with Mother Nature and to adjust to the changing seasons that we have are really natural for us. What is unnatural is the fast pace that we're having to adjust to.
Okay, hopefully you enjoyed that. I found that very impactful, and look, you can see where a video just showing something like that can help set the table and set the stage depending what you're talking about and to whom you're talking about. So lastly, in this segment, just point to some helpful resources that exist on the communications front for climate change, specifically some of those tools. Again, climateoutreach.org has a handbook for principles for effective communication. On the left-hand side, you can see in the middle, there's the Eco America has an excellent guide as well on the guide to effective climate change communication. And then on the right-hand side, you can see from the National Research Council, even the goals, audience, and strategies. I'd encourage you to look at that. EPA has some great stuff as well in terms of impacts by sector. They talk about the agricultural, the forests, energy, transportation, and water resources. So there's certainly enough resources. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you can incorporate into your own presentations. With that, I just want to recap this segment again. Really, it's about the words need to be tailored to suit the audience in a manner that resonates with them. And as indicated in from the Columbia University, as well as the Alberta Narratives Project, framing of the message types for different audiences is important to keep the communication pathway open. And of course, a picture tells 1,000 words. Everyone connects with a good storytelling also, and that's what the videos are great for doing. And so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Great climate change resources exist. I struggle with this topic, change management, talk about using terms, but really it's just, I don't know, because when I think about change management, I think of, business consultant going to come in with a program. Really this struggled with the topic in terms of looking at just how it's important for us to recognize how change impacts us as a backdrop to all what we're doing in our outreach initiatives. And I love this thing about change management consideration explained on one side. And on the left side, you have usually there's the way I like that I've heard being described is, you got a shock event, and you're disoriented. It disorientates you. And then invariably you move to some heavy emotion, it's going to be anger, anxiety. And And you can definitely see some of this with what we're living through right now. And then there comes a point when times you're trying to come to terms with what's going on, and then eventually you get to the state to moving forward. And so I just want to talk about change and types of impacts and phases, and some of which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, and some change management basics, and reflecting about some of the things that we did within our organization, and also some resources that exist out there for mainstreaming climate change. But first of all, just want to touch upon change is not easy. I mean, we're definitely creatures of habit, and so I'm obviously saying something that's everybody's cognizant of. But if you look at that graphic on the side, I mean, we might shower at a certain time when you start at the 12 o'clock slot, then you go to bed at a certain time. You might go to have your cafe or Joe in the morning at a certain time. You may exercise time. You may get dressed at a certain time. You may travel to, or used to travel to work at a certain time. Anyway, we're creatures of habit. And the reality is, it allows us to go through life with a little bit less stress. You know, the status quo often equates to a sense of comfort, stability, and equilibrium. You know, it feels, it's a good place, and then contrast that with change, often equates a sense of discomfort, instability, and disequilibrium. And I mean, I'm sure all of you have done some of these exercises. So humor me, because I'm going to picture that there are a bunch of you doing this. So, but we all know if you take your hands together, and instantly put in. So I ask you to take your hands. If you haven't done this, I'm sure you have, and put them together and fold. Okay, and take a look at which thumb's on top, which thumb's on the bottom. Now I ask you to just switch that. And I've done this 1,000 times, and ooh, it doesn't feel good. It just doesn't feel good. I don't feel, that sense of ease, that comfort, equilibrium. And the same thing with I'm sure you've done this with your fold, and I'd ask you to fold your arms as fast as you can and take a look with the position. Now try to undo that and look and feel that. Yuck. So, I mean, there's something going on there, and they say, there's that what we do physically impacts us psychologically. Conversely, what happens to us psychologically impacts us physically. But yuck, change is not easy, And stats bore that out. It's interesting. Forbes had a stat saying that 62% of employees don't like leaving their comfort zone. I'm surprised it's that low. Quite honestly, I thought it would be more. And change and stress go hand in hand. On the right side, the McKinsey and Company has stats indicating that 73% of change-affected employees report experiencing moderate to high stress levels. And so it's not widely embraced, and stress goes hand in hand. And there's a number of models that look at what's happening, and you can certainly identify with this in terms of looking at what we've been experiencing with respect to the pandemic. Where we are at the present state, it's attached to the familiar. And then in number 2, it says there's a foreign wake-up call, a disruptor. And I would say, if you look at the pandemic and what happened to COVID, it was a vertical cliff, and we fell, and it's chaos. And I mean, talk about, foreign wake-up call and disorientation. You don't know. And I don't know about you, but I was in that schism for a long period of time, even for 3 months, trying to figure out, is this actually real? Is this really happening? This is surreal. This is, am I living in, I feel like I'm living in a movie, and trying to wake up from it. And so, and anger and anxiety, all those things come into that. And then at some point in time said, this is not going to go away, and making the decision to reconcile, this is going to be a couple years. And once did that, recognizing, okay, this is the way it's going to be, you kind of move forward, and still waiting to get up to the total right-hand side. But so when you think about climate change too, I think for people, the impacts upon it, different sectors have, there's different impacts to different people, different emotions affected, different degrees of chaos that come with it. And there's different processing time to coming to terms with it. And I know it's tough because time's is not exactly on our side from this. there's different models about change and their impacts. There's Cotter's a famous one where they talk about incremental change, tweaking the system or the process, and might be in our business environment. We're adding, just a new software program. That's, I would say that's tweaking. Transitional restructuring and reorganizing. We may have in our organization, well, I might belong to another, they reorganize and reporting to a different manager. That might be a little bit transitional. Then there's the transformational, new vision, mission, and values. What comes to mind for me correctly or maybe incorrectly, I think about the oil sector and who used to say they were oil companies, and you can hear the wording coming out. No, we're energy companies, so we're in solar, whatever, we know energy, and so that's going to be more of a transformational type of change. And really, when you're starting at the incremental, the tweaking of the process, the costs and risks are minor compared to when you get to transformational. And who cares, so what? For me, I look at this for myself, and I said it's easy for some, not so easy for others. It helps me keep grounded why people might react the way they do, why there's so much pushback, because quite honestly, when we embarked upon our climate change initiative back and started before 2014. And I look at that and I see myself in the left-hand corner. We're sitting in an office, and I think people in our positions, and so I just can only speak for myself, of course, but I see us, I'm sitting in the desk and saying, you know what, we embarked upon this, and this really, we're used to looking at criteria. We're used to looking at impacts. We're used to looking at weather impacts. But what we used to do as part of our design and decision-making work, but we used to look at the past to inform what we do in the future. Now we're having to look at the future to inform what we need to do in the future modeling. That's it's a little bit of a game changer. But really, when I look at what we did, and while it hasn't been seamless or anything, but I felt that was an incremental change for us, because we're adding a new consideration. We're used to putting criteria on the decision-making table to inform what we should do moving forward. It's just now we have a climate lens on that. And again, who cares, so what? Why do I get in that diatribe? Because I think anybody sitting in office, that's the easy part. I feel for the ag sector. Their life's been disrupted. What used to be the norm is not the norm, as articulated in that video. So the impacts of that change are really transformational. I would think same thing with the energy sector. And so it helps me get where people are coming from, because I have to say to myself, the types of things that we did within our organization, while important and we struggle with the littlest changes as any person, we're quite incremental. So it just helps me keep grounded. So if change for a person is difficult, well, an organization is even more challenging, and because it requires looking at organizational structure. The bigger the elephant, the harder it is. And there's communication challenges, technical challenges, resource and capacity challenges, policies that has to be revamped. So I get it. It's not easy. So when you look at change management basics, in terms of what it entails, to change behavior of ourselves or someone else, we must do three things. By the way, great resource, and we'll put a link to it, is the Berkeley, California change management toolkit, really comprehensive. And they said, change is like riding an elephant. Yeah, the first thing you have to do is direct the rider, motivate the elephant, good luck, and then shape the path. And when I think about and another way of saying it is make the destination crystal clear, help people feel the need for change, and make that road path forward specific. So in terms of us, I can remember when our president, so on the left-hand side, he's in 2014 said, this is what's going to happen. We're going to incorporate climate change in everything we do. So we want to see all our technical assessments and whatnot in terms of putting a climate lens on it, and asking our clients and as part of the scope of work, do you want us to look at climate change? It's going to be part of our daily conversation. So the initiative came from the top, making the destination crystal clear, and that came from our president. Then helping people feel the need for a change. A number of capacity building sessions were done, and lots of workshops done internally for our staff to understand, why are we doing this? Why is it important? You know, and how does this impact what we're going to do for in our day-to-day work in the engineering company, and then make the those change, you know, make it specific what's going to happen there. And quite honest, what we do in our day-to-day, every project gets vetted to make sure that climate change is being at least asked for and looked at and advocated for with our clients. So change management looks at really behaviors that need to change, system processes and procedures that need to be in place, other preparation activities, training, and the consequences to sustain behavioral change. And we certainly needed, or from our case, I know top down, when the president's decrees something, it's going to happen. And so, but having said that, I'm going to say I'm a firm believer, you know, in that. And I think it's, I do believe perhaps it's a Buddhist saying, people help build what help support what they help to build. And I think you need that bottom up approach. And this is where I'm going to give some kudos to Juliana Tang, who's been our moderator. I mean, she's been a champion of a lot of this in our organization, talking about this since the early 2000s. And if you, at the end of the day, you can decree something, but if the ignition happens because the masses are doing something, and you need champions. And so we need champions throughout the organization to do that. And Juliana was one of those catalysts. And as part of what we've done within our organization is there's even a climate change group that communicates regularly to people and gets involved. So if you look at some of the literature, and again, I don't want to as I said, this is not about climate change management, but in terms of just more so about what can we be up against when we're in, you know, in our climate change outreach objectives, and we're trying to, I guess, move the elephant in our own organization. Ideally, some of the things that are going to need to be thought about, if they haven't been already, is you got to define what you're trying to do, just like our, you know, where are you heading? And for us, it was clarifying what is changing and why by our president, and then planning a number of things. And I've got bolded on the bottom there, designing plans for communications and training. And then we had to enable and activate catalysts and leaders in every discipline. We have climate change champions, and they're regularly communicating to all us the latest and the greatest, and it's very important to do that. And then there's monitoring takes place to reinforce the behaviors that are taking place. So again, there are helpful resources out there, from planning to mainstreaming climate change adaptation. So I encourage you, in this case, is the World Resource Institute. There's a number of them. I just give me some links. We'll have some links to other stuff as well. Global Climate Change Alliance has some interesting modules, some slides that you can download about mainstreaming, you know, and why mainstream climate change, and tools and actions for supporting institutional and capacity strengthening. So there are a number of resources, and again, we'll provide some links for that. So that almost brings me to the conclusion of this whole entire segment. And I love this quote from Paul Pulma. Is climate change is sometimes misunderstood as being about changes in the weather. And I'm sure Dr. Jeremy Fike and Dave Sauchin would have talked about this. But I love this, where this last statement, in reality, is about changes in our very way of life. And when I reflect upon that, it's not easy. You know, the simplest changes, folding my hands, you know, is not easy. So we're up against, you know, an interesting challenge, but it's going to take everybody to be involved to move this forward. So before wrapping up and showing you another video here, I just want to conclude by giving you a little bit of a summary of what we talked about. Some of the key takeaways for this session. Knowing your audience, this entire communication session module. Knowing your audience is important. Must tailor the message to suit the audience. There are many components to communication, some with that are more impactful than others. How you say it and convey it is the most impactful. And words and facts are often mistakenly thought to be sufficient for effective climate change communication, but finding common ground is a must to connect with others that think different than us. And that's the key there. Taking science or tech talk to people talk is important. Talking in words and phrasing that resonates with people and the target audience matters. Picture works, you know, speaks 1,000 words. So we're all encouraged to use the photos, the infographics, and videos to help with our initiatives. And recognizing, as we just talked about, dealing with the simplest changes is tough. Dealing with complex changes even more, you know, something So it's not easy. And you know, the changes can be categorized as incremental, transitional, and transformational, and then the impacts are not the same for everyone, and different impacts and different level of disruption for different people groups and sectors. It's not the same for everybody. And there are many climate change mainstream resources that can be drawn upon for guidance, so no need to reinvent the wheel. And the last word is from some Alberta groups, from the Alberta Narratives Projects. I found, so on the left-hand side here, you can see it says from the rural group who's speaking, they had some comments and they said, in a crisis, the whole province will pull together and help each other out. It's an old school Western character. It's a result of real salt of the earth bunch of people, and Albertans are just really, really great folks, and they care about each other, and that's great. And from the farmers group, what you'll see here, and if I can, yeah, it says, when you see how the rest of the world lives, we are very privileged. Alberta is literally the best place in the world to live, hands down. And when I think about that is, you know, if there's one thing that's common ground, we love this, we live in a great country, we live in a great province. And I think at the end of the day, we'd love to ensure that this great province, this great country is going to be enjoyable, be in a state that is enjoyable, and all the benefits that we've all derived from it can be there for future generations. And with that, actually that farmers group comment triggered me to share this video, which I hope you'll enjoy, produced by here in Alberta. So it's showtime. We share a common ground.
So close your eyes and see me go old. Feels to chase a breeze, hold your eyes up to the trees. Have you ever seen the sun jumping into a stream? It's really something to see.
We would like to know from all of you, what the most interesting concept that you've learned about in today's session is. It seemed like active listening was something that resonated a lot with people. Kind first, right later. I think that's a good motto to go forward with. I like that that's resonating with people too.
Oh, that's cool.
And you know, I think this is out of the sessions we've done so far, this is the biggest variety of responses we've seen. So I think that's really great. Okay, well, thanks everyone for participating in our poll.